in our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt an act and give to ourselves this Constitution. Yes, these were the words from the preamble of our Constitution, and in this segment today we are going to talk about the Constitution Day. So let's move forward and look at the topics of discussion step by step. First and foremost, we are going to talk about why news. We will also talk about background of the Constitution and the salient features of the Constitution. We will also talk about important amendments in the sense that we are going to discuss about the 42nd and the 44th constitutional amendments. Alright, we will see what are the criticisms against our Constitution, and we will also talk about the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution. We will also talk about questions. I am going to give you few questions in the midst of the segment just to stir up your mind. So let's move forward and talk about why news, because Constitution Day is being celebrated pan-India. For the first time ever, Constitution Day was celebrated in the year 2015 when the government decided to choose this day to be celebrated as the Constitution Day as a tribute to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar or the modern Manu. Now this day is also celebrated as the National Law Day, and it commemorates, of course, the adoption of the Constitution, as I opened with these opening lines, and it showed that yes, we adopted the Constitution on the 26th day of November. So we will talk about the background also, but first I would like to give you few very interesting facts about the Constitution. Alright, we all know who drafted the Constitution, but do we know who wrote it? Yes, by writing I mean that the Constitution was not a printed Constitution, but it was a handwritten Constitution, and it was written by Prem Vihari Narayan Raizada. It was published in Dehradun, and it would interest you to know that each and every page of the Constitution of India was decorated by the artists of Shanti Niketan. Also, the original copies were written in both Hindi and in English, and these are stored, the original copies are stored in the Library of the Parliament in special helium-filled cases. Yes, helium. I hope you found these interesting, because I did. So let's begin and move forward. So if we talk about the background of the Constitution, these are some key years. Let's talk about them one by one. In 1946, Britain decides to grant independence to India, and then talk about what are going to be the modalities to transfer the power. After that, on 9th December 1946, for the first time ever, the Constituent Assembly meets. So in the comment segment, you have to tell me who was the president of the Constituent Assembly when it met on 9 December 1946. On 14th August 1947, there was a proposal that was put forth for the creation of a committee, a drafting committee. After that, on 29th August 1949, drafting committee has been established, was established. So I am going to name 4 of the members of the drafting committee. You have to tell me in the comment section who were the rest 3. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, of course, the chairperson. After that, Dr. K. Munshi. After that, N. Gopala Swami Ayyanagar and Aladi Krishna Swami Iyer. In the comment segment, tell me the rest of the 3 names. Then, the Constituent Assembly took precisely 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to frame Constitution for India, and there were about 2000 amendments that were suggested throughout the process. After that, on the 26th day of November 1949, we adopted our Constitution. Some articles came into force after that and some came after 26 January 1950. Now let's move forward and talk about the background of the Constitution. If we talk about the background of the Constitution, we will definitely concern ourselves with the Government of India Act 1935, which is known as the blueprint of the Constitution, in the sense that it provided many provisions. These two we will discuss, but it provided office of governor. I'm going to write it here. Office of Governor, Public Service Commission, emergency provisions were also given through that. Then parliamentary form of government, basically we adopted from United Kingdom, but we can say that yes, we also adopted from this particular Constitution Amendment Act of Government of India Act 1935. Okay, so but the most important features were these two: federal legislature and provincial autonomy. If it talk about federal legislature, then federal legislature meant that it will have two houses: bicameralism, the Council of States being the upper house and Federal Assembly being the lower house. So Council of States had the tenure of 3 years. Federal Assembly or lower house had a tenure of 5 years. If we talk about provincial autonomy, the provinces were granted independence and the right to break free from external control and intrusion. Also, it provided for the setup of 3 lists, the devolution of power by 3 lists, with the help of 3 lists, namely provincial list, federal list and concurrent list. If we talk about the residuary powers resided with the Viceroy. So let's move forward. As Constitution is known as a bag of borrowing, but it's not true, because Constitution has been modified in many ways to adapt to the necessity of the diversity and heterogeneity of our country. So if we talk about Russia, from Russia we adopted fundamental duties and the ideals of justice in the preamble. If we talk about Japan, we adopted the procedure established by law. If we talk about UK, we adopted post of PM. There are many, I am just going to name 3. Post of PM, nominal head, there the nominal head is the hereditary head, that is the Queen, but here we have an indirectly elected nominal head, that is the President. Also, cabinet system, writs, and also you can name a few in the comment segment if you like. Then if we talk about Canada, we adopted the concept of a strong center, and also the residuary power which are not stated in the state list or the concurrent list or the union list, the residuary powers to be held by the center or the union. If we talk about USA, we adopted the concept of Supreme Court, we adopted the concept of fundamental rights, preamble, impeachment of the president, and so on. And if we talk about Ireland, very interestingly, from Ireland we adopted the directive principles of state policy. Did you know that Ireland adopted DPSP from Spain? Yeah. So now let's move forward. There are many other countries, but because we have a time constraint procedure, so I'm not going to discuss all. You can go and look in the books and different sites if you want to. So let's move forward and talk about the salient features of the Constitution. The first salient feature that we are going to discuss is single constitution. Single constitution for both the states and the union, because our Constitution wants to encouraged the ideals of nationalism as well as a sense of convergence and unity in India. The federal structure. Now, federal, our country is not completely federal, but we do have certain federal features such as written constitution, supremacy of the constitution, rigid constitution, independent judiciary, the devolution of power with the help of Schedule 7 that provides for 3 lists, state list, union list and concurrent list. So these are certain federal features. Also bicameral legislature is there. Parliamentary form of government which provides for 2 houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, so that proper coordination is maintained, and because in our country there is no clear-cut separation between the executive and the judiciary as executive and the legislature. Beg your pardon. It is the lengthiest written constitution. Of course, now with 448 articles divided into 25 parts. 448 articles divided into 25 parts with 12 schedules and more than 100 amendments. Our constitution is the lengthiest constitution in the world. Now this can be attributed because of the heterogeneity and the diversity and the vast expanse of our country as well. It is rigid as well as flexible. Rigid in the sense some of the articles are not that easily amendable and some are easily amendable because the forefathers who drafted our constitution knew that India is a young country and India, in order to achieve her aspiration, needs to move with the time. So they drafted the constitution in the sense that it is a living constitution. It has a single citizenship. This has been adopted from which country? Comment in the comment segment. We have a single citizenship. That means one citizen who resides in one state is not discriminated against in another state. Also, the citizen of our country is free to move anywhere, expanding Indian territories. Now, let's move forward and talk about more of the salient features. Integrated and independent judiciary with the Supreme Court at the head and then followed by high courts, after that district courts and after that lower courts. And Supreme Court is the upholder as well as the protector of the Constitution of India. We have fundamental rights enshrined in Part 3 from Article 12 to 35. Now, fundamental rights are interestingly known as the Magna Carta of our Constitution, and there is one article which is known as was called as the heart and soul of the Constitution by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. It is Article 32. Why? Because if Article 32 doesn't exist, all the other fundamental rights negate themselves. Article 32 provides help to the citizens of our country to move to the Supreme Court or the High Court if their fundamental rights are infringed upon. That is why Article 32 is known as the heart and soul of our Constitution. Alright. Then comes fundamental duties, which was added in 1976 on the recommendations of Swaran Singh Committee, and they find a place in Part 4A. Only one article is there, 51A. So there were originally 10 fundamental duties, but in the year 2002, by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, one more fundamental duty was added. Can you think of it? If you can, and if you want, you can comment in the comment segment. Now, this is our procedure to stir your brains, to keep you on your toes. Directive principles of state policy. Now, directive principles of state policy find their way in from Article 36 to 51 in Part 4 of our constitutions, and these are based on the instrument of instruction which found their way in the Government of India Act 1935. Alright, so directive principles of state policy strives to achieve socio-economic justice, socio-economic justice, and fundamental rights. Beg your pardon? Fundamental rights go for political justice basically. So these should be always harmonized, these two parts. Alright. Now emergency provisions, which have been stated in part 18 from article 352 to 360. In case of emergencies, the union or the center becomes all powerful, and in this case India is a sui generis case or a sui generis case. Alright. Now let's move forward and talk about the important amendments of the Constitution. As I told you earlier that we are going to talk about only two amendments, that is 42nd and 44th. So the 42nd Amendment Act is known as the mini constitution of India because there were so many provisions that were provided, so drastic changes took place in the constitution. The mini constitution. What did it do? So the mini constitution or the 42nd Constitution Amendment Act of 1976 added 3 new words in the preamble: socialist, secular and integrity. Alright. It also added fundamental duties in part 4A as we discussed earlier. It made the president bound by the advice of the cabinet. Yeah. And it provided for administrative tribunals and tribunals for other matters. That means it added part 16A. Alright. Beg your pardon. It provided for administrative tribunals and tribunals for other matter. That means it added part 14A. It froze the seats in the Lok Sabha and the State Legislative Assembly on the basis of 1971 census till the year 2001. This was seen to be to achieve population control. So this was seen as a population controlling measure. Now it made the constitutional amendments beyond judicial scrutiny. That means it did not allow for judicial review, and it curtailed the powers of judicial review and writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now as we know, now judicial review is part of the basic structure doctrine and it's part of the basic structure of constitution. It raised the tenure of Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies from 5 to 6 years. It provided that the laws made for the implementations of DPSP, if they infringe upon the fundamental rights, they cannot be called out by the courts. They cannot be called as invalid by the courts. It also empowered the parliament to make laws to deal with anti-national actions, such laws to take precedence and preference over the fundamental rights. So it showed that the cabinet or the parliament was trying to get all powerful. Alright. Now then comes, it added 3 new directive principles, which were the equal justice and free legal aid, the participation of laborers in the industry, and the protection of environment, forest and wildlife. Let's move forward and talk about the next amendment, the 44th amendment. Now whatever was done in the 42nd amendment was undone by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. It restored the original term of Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies. It restored the provisions with regard to the quorum in the parliament. Quorum is the amount of parliamentarians who should be present to conduct the normal course of business. It omitted the reference to the British House of Commons in the provisions which pertained to parliamentary privileges, and it also gave constitutional protection to publications in a newspaper of true reports, of course, of the proceedings of parliament as well as the state legislatures. It deleted the provisions which made the satisfaction of the president, the governor and the administrator final in issuing ordinances. It restored some of the powers of the Supreme Court as well as the High Court. And the most important provision under this amendment is that it replaced the term internal disturbance by armed rebellion in respect of national emergency. Also, it made certain procedural safeguards with respect to national emergency and precedence rule. It deleted the right to property. Now, this is also a very important provision from the list of fundamental rights and made it a legal right only. It provided the fundamental rights guaranteed by Article 20 and 21, and these cannot be suspended during a national emergency. Alright, so as you can see, these two provisions, these two amendments were very important from the point of view of our exam, UPSC and State PCS exam. Now, we will talk about the criticisms of Constitution, on what basis and why is the Constitution criticized. First, that it has not been a representative body. Why? Because the members were not directly elected, and they were not directly elected on the basis of universal adult franchise. Second, that it was not a sovereign body in the sense that it was created by the proposal of the British government, and to conduct a meeting they had to take permission from the British government. The Constitution has been immensely time consuming. One of the critics say that the American Constitution took only 4 months, but our Constitution took long, approximately 3 years. So, Naziruddin Ahmad, who was a member of the Constituent Assembly, remarked that drafting committee is not drafting committee, but it's drifting committee. What an interesting fact from the point of view of prelims. It is dominated by Congress. Now, one of the criticism was that because the Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress and it was the largest party at that time, plus it had government in majority of the provinces. Granville Austin, a British constitutional expert, remarked that the Constituent Assembly was a one-party body in essentially a one-party nation, and the Assembly was the Congress and Congress was India. The Hindu dominance was seen as a big factor for the Constituent Assembly, in the sense the Constituent Assembly was a Hindu-dominated body, as said by Lord Viscount. It's a body of Hindus. The Constituent Assembly is a body of Hindus, and the Prime Minister of England at that time, Winston Churchill, remarked that only one major community in India. The Constituent Assembly is formed by only one major community in India. It was also criticized on the fact that it had lawyer as well as politician dominance over it, because lots of the big personality back then were lawyers. That is why it was criticized on that part. And other sections of the society were not sufficiently represented. This was also a complaint. Dominated by Congress, we have already discussed it. Now we will talk about the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution, which was formed on 22nd February 2000. And the terms of reference was simple: to talk about and examine in the light of the experience of how the Constitution was working in the last 50 years and how best can the Constitution respond to the growing complexities of our nation. So, it did provide a lot of recommendations, but we are not going to read all that because it's very bulky. We will only talk about the most important ones. Alright, so one of the most important recommendation was a statutory body called Interstate Trade and Commerce Commission should be established as under Article 307. Also, the governor should be appointed by a committee which comprises of the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, the Speaker of the LS or Lok Sabha, and the Chief Minister of the particular concerned state. Management of disasters as well as emergencies should be included in the concurrent list of the constitution, and in case of a political breakdown in a state, before invoking Article 356 as far as practicable, the state should be given an opportunity or a chance to explain the status and redress the situation. So we had lot less time. We could go on and on about the constitution. It's so lengthy. But as for now, I'm concluding the piece for today. Tomorrow I'm going to turn up with another segment. Until then, stay updated and thank you so much for watching.